Okay, we're recording. Hi, Bill. Welcome to this webinar on the topic of is addiction really a disease? It's been a really interesting exploration for me, and has brought me to this conversation with you. So I guess before we get a little bit further into it, could you tell anyone who's listening a little bit about yourself and your background in psychiatry and in mental health and addiction?
Sure. Jason, it's an honor to be here. It really is, and I'm really I'm glad to be here. My name is Bill Pettit. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm 77 and a half years old. I say that only because that shows that I've been around a while. This is not my first rodeo, as they say in South Dakota. I'm going to my 50-year celebration of our graduation, which actually the 50 years would have been June 9th, about 3 or 4 months ago. But in about 4 weeks, I'm going to Chicago to celebrate with those of us that are still alive, 50-year graduation from medical school. In alcohol and substance use disorders, what they referred to in the DSM-5 now. I don't know that I've met very many people whose families somewhere close to them has not been affected by alcohol. Now, there's certainly other substance use disorders. We have this incredible opioid epidemic in the United States right now. But just to take alcohol, it's rare that people have not had been affected by it. In fact, there's a 12-month prevalence of about 8.5%, at least in the United States. That's when you think about it, that's 1 in 12 people. And for men, it's actually a 12.4%, which is about 1 in 8 people. Wow. Alcohol, substance use disorder with alcohol. And that's pretty amazing to me. So I certainly had people in my life. I had uncles. I don't want to get too, but out there and not too far out, I had an uncle who, what finally got him to stop drinking was the day that he was standing in front of his beautiful family with a shotgun, and he suddenly realized, my God, this is crazy, and he put it down and he stopped. Now, he never went to another meeting. He never went to a meeting. He never went to anything. He had an insight, a powerful insight that allowed him to stop. My mother drank alcoholically. She didn't do that when we were children, but after my brother went off to Vietnam as a helicopter pilot, and 2 out of 3 were getting shot down, she started to drink, I think, to allay her fears, and afraid that any day the next knock on the door was going to be a Marine standing there saying, it's hard for me to tell you, but your son was killed in Vietnam. And it gave her some relief, but then she got physically addicted to it also, to where she had to keep drinking. And we can make that differentiation later between being psychologically addicted to something and physiologically addicted to something. Alcohol is one of the few substances that if you are drinking enough and you stop suddenly, you can actually die from the withdrawal. And that, like I say, there's only a few substances that's the case. For me, I was fortunate in that my mother we were able to make an intervention, as they say, and then I was able to teach her over time about how her mind works through what we call the 3 principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. And she, I think, gained a level of peace internally that she never had before. Which brings to the point, the alcohol is under a section called substance use disorders. And it's clear that, to me, and I think becoming clearer in the field, that it's not the problem, it's the solution people have come up with. The alcohol causes problems. Any drug use causes problems, but it's not the problem. The problem is the feeling level the person is living in. The people are innocently creating tremendous amounts of internal stress from their difficulties in dealing with life and life's challenges. And the feelings get so uncomfortable that they look for something to try to relieve that feeling inside. That, what I call, it's interesting, we use the word disease, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but to me, it's a great word because alcohol is a response to the dis-ease that the person is feeling, the lack of ease. People use alcohol to do that. A little bit more about my history, though. I've been a physician, like I said, since 1969. I've been twice certified by the American Society of Addiction Medicine in 1988, and then again in 2004. And I did work with addictions both in the United States Navy in the 9 years that I spent in the Navy. And the last 3 years, I was chief of psychiatry at the nuclear submarine base in Groton, Connecticut. But also when nearly 10 years that I taught at West Virginia University, on a weekly basis, I consulted and did a group on the substance abuse, alcohol addiction unit at the university, West Virginia University. I'm also, and I say this just because I, want people to know there's some credibility here, that I was also board certified not only in psychiatry but in mind-body medicine, what we call psychosomatic medicine. I was board certified also in adolescent psychiatry and also in geriatric psychiatry. My first experience, when I think back, besides my own family experience, when I was in the Navy in 1971, I was a doctor for a squadron. I got drafted, and I was a doctor for a squadron of Navy pilots. And I was talking to you about this earlier. There's been almost a machismo, there was for a long time, I think, people took pride in how much they could drink and still function. This literally in the Navy, there used to be signs, even on public could see it as they drove by the Navy base, tonight at the Officers Club, drinking contest between VS4 and HS29, and drinking contests. And then you would walk, if you went that night that Friday night to the Officers Club, when you walked in the bathroom, it was not unusual to see these young pilots puking all over the floor after they had won their contest by chugging so many things of beer. Yeah. And when you think of that, it was pretty crazy. And they started to realize that they had a problem at that time. There was no armed services alcohol programs at that time in 1971. And they sent myself and another doctor to New York to spend a week with a woman named Claire Bissell and her staff at Roosevelt Hospital in New York City. And Claire Bissell had published an article in the American Journal of Psychiatry on 100 alcoholic physicians that she had treated and had. And it was a pretty amazing experience. One day when we were sitting with her, I think maybe the first day, and this was amazing because she had been sober 12 years, had not had a drink, and she reached over and she took a little pill, and she said, "Do you know what this pill is?" And we said no, and she said, "Well, it's Antabuse." She said, I have been sober 12 years, and it's rare that I feel the need But today I've gotten going too fast. I've got too many commitments. I'm speaking at the New York Athletic Club at noon, and I started to have these cravings. Just a couple of shots of vodka wouldn't hurt anything. And she said, I know enough to know that I've got to take that off the table. And she said, for me, the best way is to take one of these anti-abuse pills, because I know that if I drink now, I'll start puking my guts out and have terrible headaches and not feel very good. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of my background. Through the years, I've certainly, my 50 years as a physician and 45 years in psychiatry, and then the last 36 years with, added to that, my knowledge, being a student of the 3 universal principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. I've been able to help many more people find a place of inner peace where they didn't need something external like that to try to give them relief.
Yeah.
So let me stop for a moment, and I got rambling there a little bit. I apologize.
No, that's good. That's great. And it's like, there's, so much experience that you have of this stuff, and, right back from the days before it was such a big thing, to whereas now it's, it's so widespread. And like you said, the opioid epidemic, and there's so many different ways of, of treating addiction. And I was speaking to Steve Chandler the other a couple of months ago, and he said to me, that we get so caught up in, the method of treatment that we forget the purpose of it, which is just to feel a little bit better, to get relief, to get freedom from the experience that we're having. And you mentioned the American Society for Addiction Medicine, which brings me to my first question, because I kind of started doing some research on the disease concept, model, however you call it, to try and look back at it. Because originally in AA, I found some quotes from Bill W. that he said that he didn't like the term disease, and like people seem to think that it originated from AA, but he said he preferred the term illness or malady in some of Bill Wilson's quotes. And, from what I could find, it was the American Society of Addiction Medicine that said, addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry, which I personally am not qualified to argue with or to say anything about, so I wonder, like, from you, in kind of simple terms, really, what do they mean by that?
Yeah. Do you want to say that again slowly?
Yeah. Addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry.
Great. Okay, well, let me go first to the whole idea of disease and kind of the history as I understand it. If you read in literature, even from the 17th, 18th, 19th century, the town drunkard, or the drunkard, was seen as low life, was seen as having a moral, if you will, a moral turpitude, morally depraved. They were seen as not a good person, and I think that one of the things that happened is that people were trying to find a way. Two things, I think: the disease model, and then we'll go to the definition. I actually went to the Oxford Dictionary this morning, along with my DSM-5. I think there was two motivations to make it a disease, and look for the grain. And then there's a grain of truth that I'll talk to about. I think the two motivations were, one, to stop having people being seen as morally bad people, and number two was to try to get some insurance coverage in the United States, where there's private, where you have to have a disease to get care for your disease. Then that allowed people to fight for there being alcohol programs You know, of course, some of the first ones were in the armed services. There was a big 100-bed unit that I trained with, went to study when I was in residency in 1973, 1974 out in Long Beach, and eventually then the Navy got one in the East Coast also. But that started, then there started to be whole groups of, there's a whole series of gateway, it became an industry. And the only way the industry could survive was to have insurance coverage. And as you know, billions of dollars were spent on that because there were 30-day programs. For years and years and years, there were 30-day programs, but there was a tremendous recidivism rate. You know, and of course, I believe that's because they didn't see that they didn't see how to truly help the people on a consistent basis to live without dis-ease, without that level of tension. And it's important to me as I talk, and I certainly, as we talk about the 12-step programs, which have saved a lot of people's lives, and so I'm not here to make the 12-step programs wrong, but I do think there's a good, better, best. And I think there's something, as we talk further, that we can talk about that. But as far as the disease, the definition, interestingly, in the Oxford, you know, since I'm talking to people from the UK, I thought it would be important. Instead of my American dictionary, I thought I went to my Oxford dictionary. It says, a disorder of structure or function in a human, animal, or plant, especially one that produces specific signs or symptoms, or there affects a specific location and is not simply a direct result of physical injury. So disease has typically been, you know, some disease like diabetes, something heart that you can see it in the body, it's measured. Now, it also says figuratively, a particular quality, habit, or disposition regarded as adversely affecting a person or a group of people. You know, and then they give an example of departmental administration has often led to the dread disease of departmentalism. But figuratively, you could use any word as long as you define it the way you want it to be defined, right? So here's what they say: the essential feature of substance use disorder, this is the DSM-5, is a cluster of cognitive, behavioral, and physiological symptoms indicating that an individual continues using a substance despite significant substance-related problems. And that's certainly, that's a substance use disorder. So it's certainly true that until a person finds a new way to deal with life, they're going to do what gives them the best relief, even though it has adverse side effects. So to me, that's what happens. Now, as far as the definition from the American Society of Addiction Medicine, and they kind of refer to that in here. They say an important characteristic of substance use disorders is an underlying change in brain circuits that may persist beyond detoxification, particularly in individuals with severe disorders. Now, it's kind of bigger than this discussion, but what happens in the chronic state of mental stress, if you hook people up to PET scanners or fMRIs that measure the physiology in the brain, and you take volunteers, and this has been done for over 30 years now, and you take volunteers, let's say the first one they did in the late 80s was only 6 people, and they were not people that had been sexually abused, they were not people that had been in combat, that were, you know, soldiers. They were if you will, the average person who had not experienced significant trauma in their life. And they hooked them up to PET scanners that measured their brain physiology, Jason. And then they asked them for 3 minutes to think upsetting thoughts about something that happened in their life. Now, these people later, they asked them, they thought about when their grandmother died when they were 12, or when their dog got killed when they were 9, their first dog. But they got into thinking about that in those 3 minutes, and every one of them created a measurable biochemical dysregulation in their brain in 3 minutes of upsetting thinking. So they've shown now, and I often refer people to the book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Dr. Sapolsky from Stanford, who's very, very funny and very brilliant. And he shows what happens in the brain from the chronic state of mental stress. And it affects all the things that they talk about, even without alcohol. It affects the circuitry in the brain. There's what they call apoptosis. Brain cells die. They commit suicide, which means a lot of the connections in the brain, just from the chronic state of mental stress, they go from 4-lane highways to dirt roads with potholes. So does the alcohol help those circuits get any better? Those roads get better? No. But I think it's really important to know that I think that research will show very clearly that the primary problem has been the chronic state of mental stress that has created the internal experience of dis-ease that the people have responded to by using the substance.
Yeah.
And so now here's the deal. That circuitry, first of all, we have neuroplasticity, which is showing now that if people do get back to a peaceful state of mind, there's an incredible amount of restructuring that can happen in the brain that 25 years ago we didn't think was possible. That there's especially the hypothalamus, there's areas of the brain where you literally get new brain cells. We didn't think that was possible. So that the other thing is that even if there's some areas that are not fully the way they used to be, I have seen people that have had pretty severe head injuries that learned how to live and not be frightened by their experience or the limitations of their computer, to where it had nothing to do with them not being at peace of mind. So I would even make the case, and again, it would take more time maybe than this talk, but that even if there's circuitry that has been affected, it doesn't mean that because peace of mind is not, it's spiritual, it's formless. Our mind is formless. The brain is a computer, and you certainly want the brain to be in as good a condition as possible. But even with a brain that's not in good condition, a person can still have peace of mind.
Yeah. So if I could summarize that, I'd say what you're saying is that people can return to normal, that once they're damaged from alcohol, or even, as you said, from brain injury, that they have the capacity and capability, that it's not a permanent, unreversible state, right?
Well, what I'm saying is that they may not be able to, they may have done enough damage that their memory may never be the same again.
Yeah.
But that when I'm talking, and I'll take it to an extreme, Alzheimer's. I'm saying that mental well-being is beyond the brain structure. So this lady that I know, she was a mother-in-law of a friend. They'd been married like 60 some years, and she got such severe dementia that she had Alzheimer's disease, and she would hallucinate, but she hallucinated giant flowers and the Pillsbury Doughboy, which might not mean anything to
No, I
people.
know it is, yeah.
Yeah, okay. She didn't hallucinate frightening things, and she played hide and seek with her husband. And one day, her husband said to her, "Betty, what's my name?" And she looked at him and she said, "Oh, you know that's not what's important." Now, if that isn't mental well-being, I don't know what is. So even with an injured brain, she still had love and lightheartedness and a peaceful feeling in her heart. Now, let me talk about heredity if I can, but if there's something you want to say before that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think hereditary is important as well. You know, I've got some questions that I need to get through, so we're going to have to, get to them. But if you want to touch on hereditary, that's great.
Well, very quickly, you know, what's heredity? They claim it's about 40 to 50%, but here's what I would say to people is that I certainly have the genes from both sides of my family that if I got myself stressed enough, and I'll admit, when I was in medical school and college, alcohol was what I used to deal with insecurity. Now, I was fortunate enough not to pass that point, I guess, where you know it had it took control of my life, the alcohol, because I was fortunate enough to learn some stuff that I didn't stay in that state long enough and use the alcohol long enough. But here's the deal about heredity, and this is straight from the American Society of Addiction Medicine. The research shows that what's heredity, and that points to the quote you said about the reward system, is that people find when they get distressed, they find what gives them the most reward, what gives them the most bang for their buck, if you will, or for their pound. and so some people, the first time they have a drink of, they're maybe 16, 17 years old, and somebody gives them a couple of shots of vodka or gin, and they go, "Oh my gosh, I'm home. I feel normal for the first time in my life." Now, their buddy right next to them might be spitting it out and saying, "Oh God, that tastes terrible and it makes me feel terrible." But then he badly twists his ankle 2 weeks later, and the doctor says, "You know, I'm going to give you a dozen Percocets or a dozen OxyContin or a dozen opiate." And the first time he takes a pill of OxyContin or Percocet, he goes, "Oh my God, I feel normal for the first time in my life." Mm-hmm. So you see that different people, other people don't drink, they don't use drugs, but they have eating disorders where they make themselves puke and eat in large amounts and puke. And they literally, in doing that, they increase tryptophan in their body, which is a precursor to serotonin. Other people go and they shoplift because they get a rush of noradrenaline and dopamine and all these things. And I've had people one time that after the third DUI, they lost their license, so they literally stopped drinking. But then that's when they started shoplifting, or that's when they then got addicted to opioids. And I had one person that came to me that was depressed, but she'd been sober for 8 years. And I said, "Whoa, that's really nice. How'd you do that?" "Through AA." I said, "That's really worked out well for you?" She said, "Well, yes and no." She said, "I haven't had a drink for 8 years, but I gained 60 pounds in the next 6 months. So I went to Overeaters Anonymous and I got that under control." I said, "Oh, well, that was great. So were things been okay after that?" "Well, not really, because I found out that I had a gambling addiction and I started gambling, but I went to Gambling Anonymous also. And this is true." And I said, "Well, did things work out well then?" She said, "No, because I realized I had a sex addiction. I started having sex with anybody and anything that moved." Now, to her, by the old model, she said, well, doctor, I have an addictive personality. I said, you don't have I'm going to ask you to be open to, you don't have addictive personality. You've just told me earlier in our interview that you're spending 10 to 12 hours a day in worry, guilt, resentment, upset when things aren't the way you want them to be, overanalyzing, and unresolved grief. And I'm suggesting to you that those 10 to 12 hours a day of creating this dysregulation and this dis-ease inside of you, you've continued to take away what you were using to try to get relief from that. At first it was alcohol, then it was food, then it was gambling, then it was sex. But it's not, those things are not the problem. Those are the solutions you've come up with. And until you stop spending 10 to 12 hours a day creating pain inside of you with your thinking and know how to do that, you'll continue to look to something, and you'll continue to have cravings for something every time you start creating more stress inside of you, because your brain will say, oh, this will give you some relief. This will give you some relief. So when the ASAM talks about memory, of course, the brain will say, oh, well, given the way you're feeling right now, so remember the alcohol gave you some relief for a while, the gambling gave you some relief for a while, the indiscriminate sex gave you some relief for a while, so it will have those memories of what you did the last time to give you some relief from that internal feeling. But again, those are the solutions. They're not the problem. The problem is what the person is doing innocently with a lack of understanding how the mind works and what resources are available to them in their mind, that they're innocently responding to life with a lot of stressful thinking.
Yeah. Wow. It's not a question, but it's a point. It is a question. There's a question out of it, but it also goes on the, after that quote about what the disease is, it says that substance use disorder, which I guess they've picked out the DSM treatment, like the treatment of all chronic disease. So they're suggesting that it's a permanent state of being by using the word chronic, I guess, involves behavioral change, and behavioral change is hard. You know, that's the actual words that I got from there. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about, you know, like what is behavioral change and why is it hard, and why do they see that as the solution for what we're talking about?
That's a great question, and I'll try to go slow here. If I need to slow down, just tell me. I'm going to ask people to imagine that you have a little train, and that it's not on rails. I was in Copenhagen, and they have this little train that goes around Tivoli, or the amusement park, and it can go anywhere at once because it's not on rails, okay? And I'm going to suggest to you, I'll answer your question and then give why I'm saying it, that trying to change behavior is like taking that train's caboose and pointing it in a different direction and thinking that you can change the direction of the train by changing the direction of the caboose. It's not going to happen, is it, Jason?
No.
Because the caboose is going to follow the train.
Yeah.
Okay? So behavior is the last step. Behavior is the last step. So what's the engine? Well, the engine is the power and gift to create experience by using this gift that we've all been given called the power of thought. And so people face life, and that's the engine, and then they create these cars. So what are the cars? The cars are, I face something in life, I have a thought. The thought creates an emotional state immediately. There's a feeling attached to every thought we have, conscious or unconscious. So what we're aware of often not is what we thought, but of the feeling that we're living in. With whatever thoughts we're giving attention to, there's also a physiology. So we often feel it in our body. We feel a tension. We feel a tension in our stomach, in our head. So people have something happens, they have a thought, they have this experience of feeling level and a physical, and then they have thoughts about that experience that they just created. And so then they have another feeling and another physiological thought, and that's another car. And then that process keeps going. We keep creating our experience from the inside out. Most people think that experience is created by other people and events. It's not. And I didn't know that till I was 41. But so people keep creating this experience, and that's the cars of the train. And then finally, their internal experience is something that they feel, I have to do something about it. I have to hit this person in the face. I have to go get a gun and or blow up somebody's car. I have to have a pint of vodka. I have to have a shot of cocaine. I have to eat a whole box of Oreos. I have to do something to give me some relief. So if you try to stop having those shots of vodka or their extra glass of wine or that by trying to do that, but you're still creating the same rest of the train, that by innocent, and it's important that people hear innocence, because I did not know how to live at peace, even start to learn, until I was 41 years old. With all my education, I went in and out of clinical depression for 21 years. And 6 psychiatrists led me through those episodes, but not one of them, God loved them, they were good people, but not one of them taught me how to live at peace and not be at the effect of my thoughts and my physiology that I created via my thinking. No one taught me when to leave my thinking alone. Yeah. And that there was a place of wisdom inside as part of the human condition that is available, that would guide me every time, if I was willing to have the courage to leave my thinking alone and not try to figure it out. My experience in working with people with alcohol problems is that they're beautiful, beautiful, and beautiful people that have so much wanted to find a place of peace. And God loved Bill W. He had a powerful spiritual experience that came to him suddenly. He didn't do any 12 steps. He had a powerful spiritual experience that changed his life forever. And then he wanted to somehow try to give that experience to others. So he came up with these steps. Well, God love him. He was trying to share a powerful internal insight that he had that freed him from the content of his thinking, from the demons that he had created. But trying to change your behavior by trying to change your behavior, as that says, it truly is hard unless you start to live in a different feeling state, and then your behavior changes effortlessly. And I'll tell a story about my mother, if I could, after she, if I can I do that briefly?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will be brief. Now, I know that one of the questions is about abstinence, and I'm not going to get into any argument with anybody. As long as people are still using the substance to try to get some relief from their experience, then I think abstinence is probably the best thing. But here's the deal. The only time a drug gives us some relief is that when we're lower than the drug. That's an interesting thing to say. If you and I had really bad colds, and I said, oh, Jason, and we were next, that's okay, I've got some Dayquil here. And we were going to be going on the air, and we were stuffy and running our nose, and we've only got 30 minutes before we do the podcast. We didn't. We're good. We're doing good. But so I give you a couple of Dayquil, and I take a couple of Dayquil, and then we go on the air in 30 minutes, and we're not feeling great, but our nose isn't running anymore. We're not stuffy. We're feeling much better. Are we not?
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, if you and I are feeling good physically, and I say, hey, Jason, I got a couple of Dayquil. Want a couple? And if you and I would take a couple of Dayquil when we're feeling good, in 30 minutes, we would feel worse. One of us might be nauseated. The other one might be having trouble keeping their eyes open or feel jittery because we didn't need that. So I'm with my mother, and this is in my early days of understanding these three principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. And she had come to seminars that I'm done, and she's gotten to a level of serenity far beyond. She used to drink a fifth of vodka a day, right, when she was drinking, and still worked. Amazing, getting awards for outstanding awards for her work. Amazing. Now she's sober now, and we're going. I was happened to be home for a period of months with my wife and family, and it was a time in their life where they were going with friends to 50-year marriage, 50-year anniversaries, and they would have champagne in front, and you were to drink at times to celebrate the thing. And I noticed my mother, who's a year or two sober, or a couple of years, she's clicking the glass and taking a little sip of the champagne. And I'm going, holy shit, right? So then I noticed sometime in the evening when she stopped doing that. She would grab her water glass, she'd clink it. And so I was curious, and I said, Mom, I noticed that at the beginning, you were drinking a little sip of the champagne. She said, yeah, I was celebrating, you know. I said, well, why did you stop? She said, well, because I started to feel the alcohol, and it made me feel worse than I was feeling. She said, now when I used to drink, because I was feeling so bad inside, the alcohol used to make me feel better. So she now was like you and I without a cold taking 2 Dayquils.
Yeah.
She was not frightened by the alcohol, Jason, but she was in tune with her feeling level. And when that alcohol started to change the way she felt in a way that wasn't good, she didn't have to, it wasn't hard for her to stop, because it was making her feel worse now, given that she was feeling at peace inside.
Yeah.
That's interesting, isn't it?
It makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Look, when you first started talking, it made me think about that. The experience that I hear shared and that I used to share myself was that when I stopped drinking or I stopped taking drugs, then that's when problems started. That's when it got worse. And that's because I was no longer medicating my experience.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I've got about 6 or 7 questions. So we need to sort of limit the time we spend on each of them so I can try and get a little bit of them.
Try to do 4 minutes. Yeah.
I'm sure we could talk for hours. You know, I'd love to, I could for sure. So the next one in my list is what's the difference between giving people tools and techniques versus arming them with the understanding that they have all the answers, and how does that play out in long-term recovery? And how do you see that question? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, tools versus what was the other thing? Understanding.
Tools and techniques versus arming them with the understanding that they have all the answers, like pointing them inside versus giving them things to try and keep doing in order to be okay.
Right. You know, it's interesting. I'm writing an article and I'm studying somebody that I think you probably remember, maybe called Thomas Kuhn, who talks about the structure of scientific revolutions. And he says that in science, even if a paradigm is failing, it will not be replaced until it has a successor that is able to answer the questions that the other paradigm hasn't been able to. I mean, even if it's failing, it will stay there until it has an adequate replacement that gives the answers. So people that continue to try to change behavior without changing the state of mind, to me, it's like that old saying of, do you want to give a person a fish, or do you want to teach them how to fish?
Yeah.
Every time they're hungry, do you want to give them a fish? So they have to, you have to keep going to the meetings. You have to, because you have to, or do you want to teach people how to access what you're trying to find in the meeting inside of you? And again, I'm not making it bad. Again, I've got a friend of mine from college that has helped a lot of young people. He's in his 70s now, but he's helped a lot of young people because of what he's learned, and he loves going to the meetings, and he does that. But unless people learn something that gives them a new level, at least a saying that's attributed to Einstein, whether he said it or not, is the problems that exist in the world, and I think individually, are a product of the level of thinking and understanding that have occurred up until this period of time. And the answers will never be found at the same level of thinking and understanding that they were created. So you think of that lady that kept having one problem after another, that went from drinking to overeating, to drugs, to sex, and then to depression. Because why? Because innocently, she hadn't had somebody present to her an understanding that she had all the wisdom she needed inside. She just needed to be reminded of that. So yeah, I think that's the difference. When people have a new level of understanding, like my mother did, they don't live in fear anymore. They don't live in fear, and they're not even afraid of cravings, because they start seeing cravings as their friend, because they know that the cravings are telling them that if they get quiet, then they listen and they say, yeah, I've been worrying about my grandson's cocaine habit. And 30 minutes later, I started having cravings to have a glass of wine.
Yeah.
So they realize that when they take themselves away from a peaceful feeling, they're going to have cravings for what they used to use to give them some relief.
Yeah. So
that
I'm seeing like a trend emerging in what you're saying, in that, like, while people have got uncomfortable feelings or a difficult state of mind that they struggle with, they're going to want to medicate it regardless of, and giving them tools and techniques, unless they really understand the nature of, their experience, where it's coming from, they're going to continue to use, whether it be drugs, alcohol, food, gambling, sex, or whether it be tools and techniques of recovery. They're going to continue to need to manage that state, right?
Yeah, the tools and techniques may help them kind of manage, is the word. Managing something is like, whoa, it could get loose anytime. And you hear people talk about that, and saying, I feel like my alcoholism could grab me at any time if I'm not vigilant. Yeah. And I used to feel that with my depression. I used to feel like depression was a black cloud walking about 2 steps behind me saying, listen, I know you're not depressed right now, but don't get too haughty, because I can have your ass anytime I want it.
Yeah.
Now, once I got some understanding, I know that nobody can depress me except me. And that's really nice. I tell people the only person that can take away my mental well-being is in my own underwear, is in my underwear. And last time I looked, there's only room for one of us. And that's really a relief if people start to know that my spouse can't do it, my circumstance. If I get paralyzed from the neck down tomorrow, that can't do it. I know that I am given and will be given everything I need to deal with whatever I face with, even if it's death tomorrow. If somebody's got a gun to the head and says, on the count of 10, I'm going to blow your brains out, I think I'll probably at least ask them to count. Would they be willing to count slowly and by halves? You know, but I know that even in that moment, I will be given a place of peace to go through that experience. I've watched friends go through dying from Lou Gehrig's disease, which usually kills people in 23 months. Both of them, three principled people. It took nearly 8 years for them to die. And the vast, vast majority of the time, they were at peace. They were full of love. They had a silly sense of humor until the last days of their life. So if people get to a state of understanding where they know that they will be okay no matter what, Jason, then they're free. They're free human beings to live this life fully and freely with all the gifts, unique gifts each one of us have been given.
Yeah. I was looking at my next question, and I think I might try. There's 3 questions, but I think they can all be answered in the same, or I'm guessing, you might tell me wrong, but it says, starting off with, in the 12 steps, it says, we must take inventory of our past and share it with another human being. I'll finish all the questions first. And then, you know, my question was, do you think this is useful? But then also my next questions were, is there any use using the past as a way of moving forward? And why do so many psychological treatment types look to the past for answers? You know, so I think they're probably all answered in the same way, but I'd love to hear, you know, what you make of that, really. So the 12-step part of taking inventory and sharing it, and then
Right.
and then so many other psychological treatment types that look to the past for answers, like myself, you know, I trained as a psychotherapist for many years, you know, which was completely focused on the past. You know, and really, is there any benefit really in using the past as a way of moving forward?
Great questions. First of all, and so how much time do we have left here? Just so I know.
We've got about 25 minutes left.
Oh, okay. So as far as the inventory, you know, I think there are some people that have found that in AA. That obviously was something that Bill W. made up and the people that he worked with. I've had some people that found that helpful to kind of review and look at what they did. But if you don't see your own psychological innocence, if you don't see that you were doing the best that you knew at the time, I've seen other people, as they did that 4th step, they literally became suicidal and or went and started drinking. You know, so I won't tell people what to do or what not to do. Do I think it's worthwhile to be aware of ways that you've harmed people in the past, and if it makes sense to you and you can do it gently, to let that person know, either by a letter or by saying, could I meet with you? I feel badly and I just want to say I'm sorry. You know, if there's a way to do that, but even that I think should be done with permission, because there's some people on the other end of that will say, not only no, but hell no, stay out of my life. So I think it just comes from using common sense and love, from love and understanding, from a feeling of love and understanding, not from guilt, but from a feeling of love and understanding. If you see that you did something harmful and you say, boy, I'd like to at least make amends, or let that person know that I see something new, then that would, I think that's fine. To me, there's no shoulds one way or the other, but I think the key is to be in a feeling of love and understanding. Now, one of the things that I always tell people, if you come out of the darkness into the light, if you have some insights to where you're no longer, you see anew, and you see what you've done in the past, you've got 2 choices. And before you do anything with anybody else, I think this choice you make for yourself is an important one. So the metaphor I use, if you come out of the darkness into the light, you've got 2 choices. One is to be really grateful that you've got light and go forward. The other one is to look back into the darkness and beat the shit out of yourself for all the things that you broke and knocked over in the darkness before you had light. Now, to me, the real answer is to go forward with gratitude that you now have light. Now, in looking back, if you can see your innocence and your gratitude that you see something different, but you think it would be nice to let a person know that you're truly sorry, you didn't wish you had known better, and you didn't, and you can do that in a loving way, then I think that's okay, not without any expectation of that other person's response, whether they accept it or don't accept it. But you're just doing it because you, as a human being with a newfound level of understanding, want to be as loving as possible from where you are now. As far as answers in the past, I think the rationale came from, if I could really understand the past, then then I'll be able to change it in the present. But if I'm, again, going back to what we've said earlier, if I'm looking at the past and in even the present with the same level of understanding, I am going to continue, no matter hard I try not to, it's going to be hard, as even the book says. Behavior is going to be hard to change because I'm still experiencing life through the same lenses. My mood comes out my eyeballs. My level of understanding comes out my eyeballs. When people start to live in a different feeling state, things look different to them. I've given you the example that my father used to have road rage. I think I shared that with you one time tonight. That he used to have road rage, and people would piss him off so bad that it would make his joints would start hurting, his arthritis. He'd have heart palpitations. And one time he went the same route that he used to have to face 25 people on the way down and back, and he actually called them sons of bitches. And he said there were none today. And I said, well, what do you mean there were none? I said, didn't people do this, this, and this? And he said, well, yeah. I said, well, I thought they were the SOBs. He said, no, today I saw they were people who were just in their thinking and not watching what they were doing. And my heart went out to them. I said a little prayer that they made it home safe without hurting themselves or anybody else. So to me, as far as looking into the past, he didn't beat himself up for the times that he had given the finger or shaken their fist but he saw a different, and he was grateful. On the other hand, some people, I think, misinterpret that you never listen to somebody who feels a need to share the past with you. Some people do feel a need to share their past painful experiences with somebody who's willing to listen in a loving way. And so you never, even Sid would never turn down if somebody really needed to have him sit and listen as a friend. In one of the books, he says, you listen like a good neighbor. So, but then once you've heard them out, you can point out to them that the answer is not in the past. The answer is in the present, in learning how to live in a peaceful life now. It's not about analyzing the past. It's about gaining a new understanding to go forward from this on. And to me, that's been a freeing, wonderful thing, is to know that every moment of my life, I have a second chance. I have a second chance. I can't undo what I've done or what people have done to me. I can't. That's over. But right now, I can go from this moment and this moment and this moment and keep having my goal to just be more loving and more gentle as best as I can with the more that I see. I think that people have looked there for the answers because they didn't know how to help people change in the present. They didn't know how to teach people how to fish rather than to give them a fish every time that they were hurting. So I think it's just a new level of understanding that we have, that we can now offer people to learn how to live in the present moment, which is the strange thing, is it's the only thing that exists. Future doesn't exist. 5 minutes from now, 5 minutes ago doesn't exist. If people could start to live in the present moment with a light, loving heart, their lives will change in ways that they can never dream.
Yeah. I like that you said, there's no right or wrong, there's no should or shouldn't. It's just kind of whatever seems like common sense, what works. And, that there's times when people need to talk about the past, which is fine, but like you said, there at the end, the 5 minutes ago doesn't exist, and it seems like a totally different experience sharing the past from a place of, like, you called it psychological innocence, versus sharing the past where the experience that you talked about becoming overwhelmed with the things that you've done or the experiences that you've created. And then, like you, I've seen many people commit suicide rather than share their step forward with another person. It's kind of like, that's been the things that I've seen. And a lot of people get to that point in 12-step recovery and they run away because they see it as like an admittance of, it actually says admittance of being wrong, rather than perhaps the part that's missing out of that is the psychological innocent part, or a real understanding of the psychological innocence that I was doing the best I could given what looked like the right thing to do for me in the moment. It's like, it's so easy to take on society, friends, relationships, views of what's right and wrong, and make yourself wrong in that process of admitting it, and get caught up in all that stuff rather than just seeing yourself as doing the best in the moment.
Yeah. It's always a little, I don't know if dangerous is the word, but to even go into the world of religious beliefs. But I think it's worthwhile at least saying this, the root of the word sin that we've translated into English, because a lot of people make decisions that they're an evil person because they've done evil things or they've done hurtful things and two things to remember. One is that only people that are hurting hurt people. And you can even talk about psychopaths, and we haven't got the time, but a psychopath is somebody who's really hurting. They've had to numb it. They're hurting so bad, they've had to numb themselves from the hurt that they feel. And I could give you clinical examples that I have where once people got understanding, their behavior transformed, right? So it's interesting that the suicide rate and the depression rate among bullies is equal to that are bullied. We focus on the people that are bullied, the pain of people that get bullied, but we don't realize that if you look at the people that are bullying are in the same amount of pain. It's interesting, so the idea that and I apologize because I got a little derailed a little bit. I forget what my initial point was, but it's just that people they're doing the best that they know. And it doesn't, the word sin. So a lady said to me, is it a sin to worry? She said, my minister told me it was a sin to worry. And I said, well, the word sin comes from an Aramaic word that was in the Bible, in the New Testament. And its actual root meaning is to miss the point or to miss the mark. And when people are in internal distress, we tend to miss the point or miss the mark. We tend to do sinful things that miss the point. So I said, yes, worry is a sin in that respect. It's not evil. Doesn't deserve punishment, but it misses the point. If the point is living in a lighthearted, loving, joyful feeling and sharing that with people in your life, then anything you do that takes you away from that feeling misses the point. So in the Aramaic, it's a sin, but just because you've missed the point many times in your life doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It means that you haven't seen as clearly, and you're just trying to get the scratches off the window one by one as you have more understanding, so you can see more clearly in your life and spend more of the time in a good state of mind. And the person that gets grateful as that goes from 2% to 4% to 6% to 12% to 18% to 22%, that person that stays in a feeling of gratitude, rather than I'm not learning this fast enough, or I'm still making mistakes, I must be a bad person. The person that stays in a feeling of gratitude and catches themselves and says, okay, let me learn from this. Let me use life and even my mistakes as a place and an opportunity to learn, not to beat the shit out of myself with.
Yeah. I've got 4 questions left, and we've got a little over 10 minutes, so I'm going to try and get through these. I know that I don't think you want to answer this one, but it's like what I had written down was, is total abstinence a goal for recovery? Does it mean pass or fail? And what would be a different way of looking at this? Because it seems that people just somehow take on the idea that, like, whether you stay, especially perpetuated by the fact that they celebrate, like abstinence as in a constant state of, of being, I guess, seems to be the goal of recovery, but I don't really see it like that. I just wondered what you thought.
Well, to me, the goal of recovery is peace of mind. And I'll take it to the psychiatric. People would come to me and they'd say, Dr. Pettit, I'm on this Prozac, or I'm on this drug. I've been on this antidepressant for 20 years and I want to get off of it. Will you help me get off of it? And I say, that's never my goal. My goal is to help you find the deepest level of peace possible. And if usually what that means is that as people get a deeper and deeper level of peace, their need for the medication gets less and less, and many times people don't need any. So I do the same thing with people. I'd say, listen, right now it appears that every time you drink, the vast majority of the time it leads to trouble. So at least for now, I would think that it's a funny paradox. As long as you see alcohol as a solution to your problems, it probably makes sense not to drink and be abstinent. There may come a day, hypothetically, that you don't see it as the answer to your problems, and you can have a 4-ounce glass of wine with a good meal to have it add to the taste of the meal. I don't know. Right now, let's just deal with now. Right now, it seems like the vast majority of the time that you drink, you get in trouble. And so in your present level of understanding, that makes sense to me. That makes sense. Now, if people don't have, which I don't think AA has really had the hope, even though it was founded in Bill W. having a very profound experience, I don't think that generally people have had the hope that you could come to a state of peace, to where, like my mother, when you started to feel the alcohol, it made you feel worse. It wasn't seen as a solution. So that's all I'll say about that. I think that as long as alcohol is seen as something that solves a problem, and that when a person does it, they usually end up causing more problems in their life and in their relationships, abstinence makes sense,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So in the first of the 12 steps, it says, we are, my bad, not getting the correct words. It might be different in different programs, but we were powerless over alcohol or our addiction. Is this true? Are people really powerless?
Well, what's true is that at the level of understanding, I would change that first step to, at my level of understanding, I'm powerless over my thinking. I'm at the mercy of whatever thoughts I have in my head, and I create this incredible feeling of dis-ease in response to if my wife is not nice to me, or my husband is not nice to me, or my boss doesn't give me credit for what I do at work, or because of something I did when I was 10 years old, or what somebody did to me, or whatever. So that I'm powerless over my thoughts, whether it's memories, whether it's worries about the future, whether it's upset in the present, or whether it's being driven by having to prove myself as a worthy person. So to me, the first step really is, because if you wanted to keep alcohol in, and because I have lack understanding and I'm totally out of control related to my thinking, I found alcohol to be the thing that I've turned to try to get some relief from the pain that I've caused for myself.
Yeah.
So the alcohol is second. Being out of control of the alcohol is secondary. It's not primary. It's secondary to the fact that alcohol is the thing that I've found gives me the most relief. It hits my reward system in my brain, and gives me relief from my pain, internal pain, because of my level of understanding that makes me totally out of control of my thinking. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
It's different. The alcohol becomes secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. So something I didn't write this question down, but it's something I've been thinking about. There was a TED talk. I don't know if you ever saw it, by a reporter called Johan Hari, about the opposite of addiction is connection. And it was a really famous TED talk. It got like millions of views and stuff, and it was like, it talked about the rat park experiment where they gave rats heroin, and then they built them a really cool place to hang out and stuff, and they no longer wanted the heroin. They didn't take it, and it's like, for me, that, I guess the opposite of addiction is connection. Yeah, sort of, but there's quite a big step for me missing in between that, in like the understanding of that you can't just go from addiction, oh, I'll just get connection then and everything will be okay. Like there looks like there's a real big step in between that, and addiction, connection to me naturally happens when I'm not caught up in my thinking, So I guess I just wondered, like, it's okay saying the opposite of addiction is connection, but like, what is between those two places,
Yeah, no, I think you hit it right on the head, Jason. Just like we said, the alcohol, being out of control with alcohol is secondary to being out of control of our thinking. Connection is the natural result of being at peace. So when people learn how to be at peace in happiness and contentment, it is natural as human beings. If you watch little children, it's natural. I watch my little grandson, who's 2 years old, when he goes to the playground, he wants to connect with some of the other kids that are playing. He's never met them, but he goes and says hi to them, and they go up and down the ladder and slides together. There's a natural place when we're in a state of mental well-being. We are social beings, some more than others. Some of us like our alone time more than others, but there's a sense of awareness, if you want to get metaphysical, that we all are connected, that we're all made of the same energy. So that desire to be connected is kind of a recognition that we're all connected at an existential level, that we're all made of the same energy. But I think you hit it on the head, that desire for connection is secondary to a state of peace, an increasing state of peace. But and the middle step in between addiction and connection is learning how to live at peace, and then connection follows effortlessly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense or resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you put it. It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I would say that's a big step, or it may be like an instantaneous realization, right?
and it can be incremental. You know, it can, for most of us, it's incremental journey. I tell people, and I know I've said it many times, direction is the key. It's not the speed.
Yeah.
If you're going north from where I live, if you want to get to Alaska, you'll be better going 10 miles an hour north than you will going 80 miles an hour south.
Yeah.
Because you want to, if you're just going in the right direction and you're gentle with yourself and you keep being grateful for every little bit of step that you move forward, you will be surprised. That feeling of gratitude will carry you forward every single time.
Yeah. And I've got two questions, but I'm going to pick the one that I think people will be most interested in, to get the answer to. And it's like, the spiritual approach, the mention of higher power, the term God in the steps, people are often have had so much dogma about religion, and so much societal input and, installed beliefs from people about what it means. It's kind of like as soon as the word God's in there or spiritual or, that they become overwhelmed with that and just reject and close down to the idea that the 12 steps could be a solution, how would you explain, because there's so many other terms, right, for what they're looking at, but it's just the words that are used in the steps.
Well, to me, the word spiritual, literally, if you go to your Oxford Dictionary, it just means it has no form, has no matter. So the easiest place is to talk about the difference between the brain and the mind.
Yeah.
The brain is a computer. Our mind is spiritual. It's formless. It's connected to whatever it is that animates life. You and I know when a plant is dead. We know when a tree is dead. We know when an animal is dead. We know when a human being is dead. But none of us know what that formless thing is that makes people alive, makes a plant alive, we're connected to something. Even the physicists have acknowledged that consciousness, David Bohm said, consciousness is present before any form. So there's something formless in the world that's behind all this. You can make a lot of dogma about it. You can make a lot of beliefs about it. To me, it's the mystery. And like Sid Banks said, once you understand that it's a mystery, then you join the mystery. But people, when Bill Pettit dies, there might be somebody walking around with a box that says Dr. Pettit's brain. There will be nobody walking around with a box that says Dr. Pettit's mind. There is a spiritual, formless aspect to being human. That's why the word psyche, even psychology originally was the study of the spirit, the study of the mind, the study of the soul, the study of that formless part of being human. And I think most people, if you talk to them, they have had experiences in their life where they suddenly knew something and it wasn't from anything they'd ever been taught. They knew what to do in a certain situation. They thought they were lucky that day. I'm suggesting, I would at least suggest to those people, they weren't lucky. There is that same formless energy that heals my broken leg if a doctor puts it in a cast in 6 weeks. There's something behind that healing, and there's something that is available to us as human beings every moment of our life if we're willing to quit going to the intellect to try to figure it out. I use the metaphor in the United States, we've got these marching bands that play on Saturday at the football games. I say, I'm saying to you that there is a spiritual wisdom that's within every human being. It's formless. And you don't have to believe it. I'm just asking you to be open to it in your life and see if you don't have the experience when your mind is a little quieter and you're in a nicer feeling state that you seem to be smarter and know what to do in your life. I mean, most people know that's true. And I tell people, if wisdom is like a flute or a harp playing, you can't hear a harp or a flute if you've got the marching band playing in your head.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bill. We've covered so much stuff, and I can't wait to put this together.
Good.